to the third episode of John Wall Street's The Sports Advisors. Just a quick bit of context on who we are and what we're doing for those catching us for the first time here today. The five of us are very well aware that there are no shortage of sports business podcasts. However, nearly all of them fit into one of two buckets. One looks like our Big Business on Campus podcast, or Jane Wall Street's At the Table, where you have a host, they sit down with a high-profile guest. DIRIGO recently had Barstool's first CEO and the co-founder of Mule Media, Erica Baden, on. Mike Schreiber and I will be sitting down to record an episode of Big Business on Campus with Alabama AD Greg Byrne later this afternoon. You can catch all of our podcasts on the John Wall Street YouTube channel. The other is far less interesting. It's simply some banter between two journalists, and it's not interesting because they're observers, they're not operators. What hasn't existed up until now is a podcast for senior sports and media executives hosted by accomplished peers across the business, executives that are actually sitting in the rooms where the deals are being negotiated and the decisions are being made. So that's what this is. A roundtable of experienced operators across media, sponsorship, monetization, and technology. We're going to break down the stories that actually matter and their second order effects. With me today, again, for the third straight episode, is former Carolina Panthers CEO, former Verizon VP of Sponsorship, and the current Encore Sports and Entertainment CEO, Nick Kelly. Former Washington Commanders Chief Strategy Officer, former Shop Your Way Chief Digital Officer, and current Next League Chief AI and Innovation Officer, Shripal Shah. Former Learfield CRO, former WWE Global Head of Sales and Partnerships and Head of International, and the current, and I'm going to mess up the saying here, John, so I want you to jump in, DIRIGO Advisory founder, John Brody. John, is that the correct pronunciation there?
It is DIRIGO, which is
DIRIGO
for the state of Maine, where I'm from. So those 7 of you out there who also are from Maine, there's a shout out for us. And now we'll get Corey to start saying DIRIGO.
DIRIGO, had never seen or never heard the pronunciation of that word before. And former Fox Sports, very familiar with Fox Sports, of course, SVP of Programming Research and Content Strategy, and the current Crakes Media President, Patrick Crakes, are all here. I should mention all 4 of them are John Wall Street Advisory Advisors and available for consultation. So as you hear their wisdom today, think about how they can be helpful to your business. Advisors, welcome back.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, we're getting better at this. Everybody's saying hello now on time. The 2026 World Cup is a stress test on the modern sports business model. If you zoom out, it touches on a whole bunch of issues that are shaping our industry. You got pricing power, there's real estate optionality, and whether the event grows soccer fandom or simply monetizes existing demand. So why don't we get started talking about dynamic pricing here, which has been a very popular topic. FIFA is using dynamic pricing for the Men's World Cup for the first time, and the price of entry has become one of, if not the most dominant pre-tournament business story. The AP reported that some early game tickets are still exorbitantly priced as we record this today, with the cheapest face value tickets being sold at $380. You've got tickets at the Face Forum for the U.S. opener topping out at over $4,000. There's been a whole bunch of backlash, both political and local. You've got New York City announcing a lottery for 1,000 discounted $50 World Cup tickets for residents. Of course, much of that is political theater, but noteworthy nonetheless. So taking a step back, I guess the question is, looking at FIFA, is this smart yield management or is this a long-term brand building mistake as we talk about dynamic pricing?
Right. I mean, I think you've got a dynamic pricing been around forever, but right at the end of the day, you use dynamic pricing to optimize for a night or in a match. When you're doing brand building, you're optimizing for a decade. FIFA is choosing the night, right? It's a very short-term thinking. And when you get to yield management, that's a tool, right? It's not a strategy. When your cheapest seat is $380 and the opener's at $4,000, you're not pricing a match. You're right? You run the risk of pricing out the next generation of fans. And I think that's going to be one of the key things that they have to really think about. I'm taking my Rugrats and we're going to Spain and Saudi. We're in like the upper level back row at $385 in Atlanta. And, and I think you have to think about like what that is going to do from like a whole experience point of view, and who you're targeting and who you're excluding. And that's going to have ramifications, especially when soccer is not a mature market in the US yet. It's emerging and growing. And the question is, what impact is this going to have?
Look, you go to dynamic pricing because events like the World Cup, like a Taylor Swift performance, Taylor Swift had not toured for years. If you don't have dynamic pricing, what happens is that the pricing tickets are just, it's very hard to figure out what they should be priced, right, on a static basis. But you know that you really stand a good chance of pricing them too low. And they get gobbled up, and then they end up on a secondary market, a lot of them black market or scalpers and things like that. And the prices, the organizing body, the promoter loses control of being able to number one, value the property correctly, but also it actually places ticket prices even further out of reach for fans typically, right? Because once you go to a bunch of secondary brokers, including some of them that are off market, you end up into all sorts of more extreme pricing scenarios. And there's a lot, because there's not a lot of transaction velocity because the platform's not uniform. So dynamic pricing, this event is a unique event. It's going to have enormous demand. And the idea that ticket pricing should be really, really low for something like this is unrealistic given the costs of this event. So that's number one. So dynamic pricing is a good idea. And I can't do anything about very unique, once every 4 years, bringing the whole world together events in the modern era where sporting events are so important, being expensive. Right? They're going to be expensive one way or another. The fans are going to be unhappy one way or another. They're always unhappy with ticket prices. They're always unhappy, and I don't blame them. But it's just not everybody can go, and that's the truth. And FIFA does have an obligation to all of its members and to soccer to optimize the revenue opportunities for this event. It is a for-profit event, right? So that's number one. Does it impact the brand? I don't know that it does. I think that it's very obvious that going to sporting events is increasingly becoming more expensive because folks value them more than ever. That value is reflected in the pricing, and I don't see any real downtick in demand for sporting events because they're getting more expensive, which tells you that they're probably priced properly. And again, this is a premium, extremely unique
Hold on, Pat.
sporting
You
event.
say that as a general statement, but there's a lot of tickets unsold today.
Oh, yeah.
There are, and that brings me to the next thing. Now, I know more than a little about FIFA. I will tell you that this is not surprising to me. This has been a pretty clunky execution on their part, and the way that they've the different seating tiers and things like that. I know something about ticket sales and seating, and it's a little it confuses me, their approach on this. So that how they've done this has probably not only impacted pricing, but it's impacted the inventory management of these seats.
The reality to me is there are two issues at play. One is dynamic pricing and the realities of that for fans. And I agree with Pat that if you don't do dynamic pricing, the market's going to do it for you. And there are realities to that. The second issue is FIFA managing this the right way? And to me, the jury is still out. As we ebb closer to the event, I can't say any of us would say we're running a perfect PR machine here, or it's being managed in a way that we would all applaud. But I also want to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I want to see where we end up, a few weeks from now. But it's been clunky to say the least. I agree with Pat on that. But ultimately, the marketplace decides, the street decides, and what FIFA is trying to do is trying to gauge the market. And let's judge them when we get to the end.
I think just building on that, the one question is the brand erosion, right? Like when you look at the Super Bowl and the Knicks, yes, the pricing and the tickets are the story, but ultimately it's about the game and the memory. The question really becomes when pricing becomes the story about the receipt and not the match. You look at the Club World Cup last year, people talked about the tickets and the unsold tickets and the open seats. They don't really talk about the match. So I think the real questions can be at the end of the World Cup is a memory about the match and the gameplay, which then puts it on par with the Super Bowl and potentially this NBA Finals, or is it about the receipts, the gate? And if that's the case, then you're probably risking long-term brand value erosion.
I agree on. I understand and agree on that. Here's what I would say: I'll always bet on the sport and on the game because I've watched fandom for the last 25 years, and we all, as business people, make errors or try things and learn from things. And I think FIFA and all of us who work in this industry will hopefully always look to the sport to take us to the next level. But I think it's a great follow-up, Shripal, for us to look at post tournament to see if the story is about the U.S. winning the World Cup or Spain, whoever it may be, winning the World Cup, or is it about ticket prices? And then I think we should have that discussion again.
Yeah, what I would say is that I'm a little surprised that FIFA didn't have answers ready for this. And this is something they're rolling out that's new. So some of this is probably going to turn out to be an operation and execution issue, right? And look, managing a live event like this is, this is a hard thing to do, right? But it's probably going to be an execution issue, and maybe they'll straighten it out. But it also is going to be the case that they were always going to have complaints about ticket prices. Ticket prices were going to be an issue no matter what. Knowing the soccer fan base in the United States and the way they treat soccer as something that is a public good. And they feel very strongly about that. So they were always going to be a problem. So FIFA was not on the bounce on that, right? So we'll have to see till the end. I don't think there's anything that can damage the brand of the World Cup unless we find out that there's some kind of cheating. I just don't believe that.
Yeah, I think FIFA and U.S. Soccer did a pretty good job when the World Cup announcement happened years ago that this is 104 Super Bowls. So nobody should be shocked that these are Super Bowl price tickets. So I think that they look at the pricing of MLS matches or NFL matches for games for regular season, and they're like, that's what I expect. They did a pretty good job coming out of the gate that we're going to treat each one of these like individual Super Bowls. So the pricing shouldn't be a shock. I think that the other part when you take a step back is, when you take out they have 5 to 6 million tickets is what they're going to sell and give away to partners and everything else. Half of those people are coming from international. So you're sitting on probably call it 3 million tickets for U.S. fans. That's less than 1% of the population that's going to have a chance to go to the match. So the brand of the World Cup isn't necessarily going to be defined by, did I go to the game and was it affordable? I think it's really going to go, it goes back down to the fact that what's the competition on the field like? What's the storytelling around the World Cup for once the matches actually start all the way through the final? Because most of America is not going to get a chance to actually go to any games. I think
so that's a good point, and where I want to go with this next, Nick, because most people are not going to the World Cup. Are free fan festivals and public viewing events like we've seen outside of MSG becoming a necessarily complement to rising in-stadium prices? Because we are seeing that even regular season games to some of these events are becoming unaffordable for a large portion of the population.
Well, look, it's a good balance, right? I think it's such a unique opportunity for the official partners of FIFA. You see what Verizon, DoorDash, others are doing with literally providing tickets to the matches themselves, unique experience for being on the pitch or meeting players. You're providing access to a once in a lifetime experience. You're never acknowledging the fact that these are extremely expensive assets. But the fact is that you're providing that as an official partner, and you're providing, you're elevating the actual experience itself by you're saying, come to this once in a lifetime event. You're putting the World Cup on a pedestal, and you're making it more accessible. Now, they may be only collectively giving away a couple thousand tickets across the entire partner ecosystem, but they're making the matches accessible first. But then you're seeing, a lot of brands, some of the host committees, do these watch parties to create the environment, the vibe, the culture of like a global football event. And I think that those are probably where a lot more of the memories will come from because they're more accessible, where you'll have a fan who goes to a watch party at Pier 17 in New York or goes somewhere down in Santa Monica on the pier. Like, I think those are the types of things that if you want to, throw yourself into the actual World Cup fever, there's opportunities everywhere. I mean, here in New York City, you could walk to probably one of 2,000 bars and there's going to be people with, jerseys on screaming. They'll have, here's your Colombia bar, here's your Argentina bar. Like, you can get involved and engaged. And I think that the buzz will be there. I think that the issue we're dealing with now for the last 6 months, there's nothing going on. All the news is going to be bad news. What's the one positive thing you can talk about? Like, I think it's all the negative stuff that you've heard thus far is covering up IP at stadiums. You're hearing all about like the host committee financials. You're hearing about tickets. Like, as soon as the first match starts, that goes away. The only risk you run is operationally. You can't have, bad stadium ingress, egress, fan tickets not working, those types of scandals. And look, the reality is with, 100 plus matches, happening in all these different venues, something will happen, but the game itself has to overshadow it. And I just think that we are all caught up in this PR swirl of this is the only thing to talk about right now. Because once the draw happened, it's like, now what?
So I want to put, you mentioned ingress, egress, and we're going to talk stadiums in a second. But the question I want to ask to the other three, and perhaps maybe to John, Shripal particularly, is, as most of our audience are pro and college sports team senior executives, is there an opportunity for more of them to think like FIFA, like these host committees, and build more sponsorable experiences around their events?
I'll jump in here. Having spent a number of years in the pro and then most recently in the college space, with all due respect to FIFA, they didn't invent watch parties. Someone should go to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and go to a football game on a Saturday, and there are more people who are tailgating than there are who are going in to the stadium. And do that same thing in every city and school all around America. That's a phenomenon that America has built and American fans have cultivated. So I do think there is the idea of community, and I don't think that is a unique FIFA accent point. I think
no, but turning it into a sponsorable asset is, though, right? Meaning tons of people gather in bars in Ann Arbor, Michigan on Saturday. None of those bars, or maybe they're sponsored by a local beer brand or something, but those are not sponsored the same way that Budweiser is sponsoring the watch.
If you go around, Corey, to these campuses, whether it's Jersey Mike's, who did it for a couple of years with me when I was at Learfield, or Anheuser, different brands have been sponsoring this stuff for a number of years, and I do think there's an enormous opportunity, right? And I'll give a shout out to Nick. He did some of this stuff around the Super Bowl when he was running one of the largest brands in America. And there was a lot of fanfare and a lot of positive response to it. So sponsors and fans have been connecting for many years. I do think there's more opportunity around it. But let's remember, fans have been congregating around the venue and around the site for decades. And it's just another way to experience that energy that is sport.
Where I'm going is as ticket prices are becoming more expensive, right? And isn't there an opportunity for, and maybe it's not, and you're talking about, sure, the Super Bowl, obvious, but even the regular season game has gotten expensive now. Isn't there an opportunity for some sort of sponsored or ticketed watch parties around the venue? Because you're right, bringing sponsors and the fans together is not a new concept.
But the answer is no, Corey, and this is why a lot of those host committees fell apart. Like, the host committees fell apart because FIFA put such tight guardrails around categories that were protected. So when you look at the traditional categories that would fund a watch party in, some sort of downtown location, whatever it may be, they blocked the traditional categories. So if your financial services category is blocked for Bank of America, if you want to do a watch party in Columbus or Cincinnati, Ohio, you can't use Huntington Bank, or you can't use, any of these other people, because all of the traditional categories that are typical revenue drivers in the sponsorship space were blocked. So that's where you saw a lot of these people when they set probably fairly reasonable, some of them are unreasonable, like revenue expectations built off of sponsorships for the host committee, when they got the list of like blackout categories, it was almost impossible.
Yeah, it's everything.
But I think to build on this,
well, but that doesn't exist though. Hold on, just to further my thought, Nick, that doesn't exist though on the pro level, or does it? Meaning, is there an opportunity for teams to look at some of their
and look, and Pat can speak to this a little bit too. It's a complicated situation, right? Like I'll use Fox for example. When we were doing the watch party this past year for Super Bowl around Verizon 2 years ago, I think Fox had it was either Fox or NBC, whoever had the actual Super Bowl. We literally had to basically pay a transmission fee to basically show it in 30 stadiums across the country because, they own the rights to it. And then on top of that, were we not an NFL sponsor, we couldn't promote it as a Super Bowl watch party. So like there's so few brands, like I'll use the Michigan example. If I'm not a Michigan partner and I don't have the permission of CBS to run it, like you're going to get sued left and right. So like, I think it's tough. Like the bar situation is they're already paying for their, direct TV for business type of model. So they're already paying the licensing fee to do it. And it's part of their core business. But you popping up, if you, me and Shripal want to go set up in Central Park and do a watch party, it will never happen. It's just too challenging.
Well, I think that's the interesting part, right? So my wife and I got married 20 years ago. In 2006, we had our honeymoon in Greece and the World Cup was going on in Germany. And our biggest memory was going island by island at night, and there'd be outdoor watch parties of the World Cup. And we were running into different, like I was wearing a Beckham jersey. I'd run into random British folks, which is kind of ironic being Indian, coming up to you and wanting to bond what's going on. So, right, this is in 2006. And our biggest memory of our honeymoon as we went island to island was every night going to watch the World Cup at like an outdoor area. So that to me is something bigger than college, quite frankly. And that's been good. And I think that's what, if you haven't gone abroad to see the World Cup and the impact, it's skewed. I think what's unique to the US is the commercialization of watch parties. And I think that is something that the pros in college have done. But the scale of the watch parties in Europe during the World Cup in 2006, I would tell you is something that I had not seen after working in, even now in sports 20 years later. Because it was everywhere. Like the entire Greek island, there's watch parties everywhere you go. And you could literally, so it's a phenomenon. And I saw that 10 years later in Cartagena when I went to Colombia. And I think it was like, it was a Copa, but very similar dynamic. So I think soccer has that's unique. I think the key thing to remember though, when we talk about fan festivals and watch parties is, I think the teams and properties have realized it's not a charity anymore, a community event. It's the opportunity to build the funnel and the fan base. So people are trying to put infrastructure in place to actually capture that, to build the audience and the funnel for the future. And I think that is what's really changed. But I think the World Cup, I think it's known for these global watch parties. And I think, like, for me, it's one of my biggest memories 20 years ago. I don't remember what sightseeing I did in Greece. I know the watch parties, distinctly right now.
So, Corey, I would move that we take the sports advisors on the road and we travel throughout Europe for the World Cup. And we appreciate being your guest at great locations all around the world. Thank you very much.
You tell me where you guys want to go. I will book it this afternoon. I want to pivot the conversation.
Corey, can I just add a thought, please, real quick?
Sure, of course.
Look, these watch parties are real opportunities for brand building and for sponsorship activation. In Shripal's example, I've been in Mexico for 2 World Cups. The watch parties exist. In the United States, they're more complicated, right? Because of the sorting out the sponsorship and how you pay for everything, right? But it needs to be rethunk at the sanctioning body level with the sponsor to allow sponsorship opportunities for these watch parties, because the demand's so high for these events. They're underutilizing both the revenue potential of these secondary watch parties and the brand building exercise by creating friction. People in the experiential economy, which is where we're still at despite COVID, COVID and everything else, want experiences. And sometimes for some people, the stadium isn't as much fun as being together in a watch party. And I will tell you, as somebody who went to the national championship game at Hard Rock Stadium, parking was hard because of all the Miami fans who came to tailgate and then left before kickoff. It made parking a little complicated. So that's it.
I'm glad I gave Pat an opportunity to speak there because I thought that was a really good point, Pat. And I'm glad you actually ended on the parking at formerly Hard Rock, or it is Hard Rock right now. Okay. Because that's what I want to actually hit on. We started this conversation talking about ticket prices, and that's been one kind of big headline surrounding the World Cup. But convenience has been another one, right? The AP reported that Boston is going to that there's $80 train trips and $95 expresses from Boston to Gillette. You've got limited parking at Gillette, and you've got no parking here in New York City, and $100 plus train tickets to get to the World Cup. The World Cup didn't have much of a choice, right? They were always going to play in NFL stadiums because they needed the capacity. But I think there's a broader venue development question here as we think about teams and rights owners. Everybody's thinking about real estate optionality because they're thinking about revenue. But should teams be thinking more about the total cost of attendance, the considerations like time, friction, whether the trip is going to be easy enough for fans to make it a habit? Because I think a lot about that as a fan. I certainly am not eager to take a train to MetLife for the World Cup. And if I had to do that regularly, I wouldn't go. I'm willing to do that for this tentpole event that is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. If that was the experience regularly, I wouldn't go. And so if you were thinking about building a new venue and it gives you the option to build this beautiful district around it, but for fans to get there, it's a huge pain and they're going to come in frequently. Is that a decision that people are thinking enough about?
I think they're starting to, but your point about how the brand experience works from beginning to end is really salient. And go back to Hard Rock. I mean, that was not easy to get in that venue, and then the president showed up. No problem with the president showing up. It made everything more complicated. It's so far away from the city. It was, and MetLife has the same problem. For a regular season NFL game, the infrastructure, procedures, and payment processes for the regular season ticket holders are set up. For a special event like the World Cup, it's not set up, right? So people don't have prepaid parking. They don't have their tickets. They don't have all the infrastructure that surrounds buying the season ticket package. So it makes the transportation more complicated. I do believe firmly from the research we did at Fox and afterwards when I was in Vivo and elsewhere, that the brand experience begins when you leave the house. It kind of probably starts when you purchase your tickets, and understanding how each touch point and the friction you create, and to everything from how long does it take me to get in the parking lot and out of it to what the food costs at the stadium are all things that we kind of need to rethink about the whole role of revenue versus brand experience and where we put that pricing actually in. Should it be in the ticket, whatever? I think some folks have already begun to think about it over the past decade, but it really, there's a lot of room to run that probably Nick can probably talk about more, where you can just really improve that experience. So I think that's true. I think, and there's a lot of lift there for both brand and revenue, probably.
Yeah, I think what's frustrating too for teams sometimes is you can control everything probably once you get on the premises. I think that there's just so much politics that come into play when it comes to ingress, egress into parking, public transportation, things like that. You look at horror stories. You look at horror stories all the time that happen with when the Washington Nationals were in the playoffs a couple of years ago when they won the World Series. They had the Metro shut down before the game was over because they went into extra innings, and the team can't control that. They can call and beg and plead, please keep it open. But there's certain elements of this where the public-private partnership needs to actually be a partnership, where there needs to be some sort of help there. But to the point of every regular season NFL game or Major League Baseball game, the fans themselves understand how the day goes. They know when to get there. They know the traffic patterns. They know that. these special events are always going to be a little herky-jerky because you have people who've never been to the venue before. You see this a lot too with like big concerts when you see like BTS or Taylor Swift, for fans who've never been to the venue. They just don't know where to go in. They don't know where to park. They don't know how long it takes. So like, unfortunately, this isn't going to be perfect. And I think you see it. I mean, we saw it in Miami for, I think it was Copa America last year or Gold Cup, where you have all these fans descending on Hard Rock who don't know the Uber lanes. They don't know what gate to go into. They have way too many people coming in on one side. It's going to happen. But I do think as much as they're getting heat for shutting down all the parking and shutting down all that stuff at the World Cup, you're going to see an early arriving fan base. You're going to see early arriving fans with more directional signage and more people telling you where to go than maybe you've ever seen before, to make sure that everybody's in their seat whenever the whistle blows. And I think it's just from a day-to-day basis, though, teams are kind of have one hand tied behind their back because you only can control so much of the experience. But it also goes back to the ticket pricing side of this is you need to make the game accessible to get in the door, and then you can make revenue off of plus ups or, merchandise or tickets or experiences. But, a lot of consumers feel like once they paid for their ticket, they paid so much, they don't have anything left. So it is that fine balance of add-ons versus, getting the maximum amount of revenue off the ticket.
Wait, but Shripal, what about actual venue locations though?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough thing, right? Like, so having worked at the Redskins, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I'll give them credit, is in 2006 or 7, DC changed a law where you couldn't rent buses, the city or own buses. And that became a problem because the Metro stop by FedEx Field would always, would shut down right at certain times. If you had a night game, you ran the risk of fans not being able to get home on the Metro, but they used to provide buses, and they changed that. And I think what was interesting, that wasn't in the team's hand, right? The city changed a law so you couldn't rent these buses anymore to provide, shuttle bus service after the Metro closed. And I remember Dan said this, and maybe there's a PR person who scripted it. He said, attendance isn't a purchase, it's a habit. And habits die on the commute, not at the box office, or some form of that. And I thought it was really elegant. No one would believe but he said it as we were lobbying the county and stuff to look for that. And I think that the reality is we've spent a decade optimizing stadium real estate and almost no time to optimize a trip getting there, because the total cost of attendance is your money plus your time and the friction. And the friction is the thing that no one wants on their P&L. The properties don't want it, neither do the counties. And that's going to be the challenge. But I think the reality was when Dan bought the team, he didn't control where FedEx Field was. Jack Kent Cook put it there. And as you now go to the mixed use area, I think as people go into the suburbs, if the counties aren't willing to actually widen the roads and do these things, you're going to run into very similar issues. It's going to be history repeating itself.
So, guys, we're John. Hold on. I'm going to toss this over to you, but I want to just make sure we're running up close to time here, and I want to make sure we talk about actually growth of the sport. Right, the tournament's going to generate record money. We know that, but the strategic question of whether or not it's going to convert casual American soccer fans into long-term consumers remains very undecided. I guess the question I have for you, John, is what are the right KPIs to be tracking here? Are we looking at TV ratings? Are we going to be looking at youth participation on the back end of this? MLS attendance?
Yeah, we're talking a lot before the event begins about maybe some of the messy lead-in, ticket prices, infrastructure challenges. Every place I've been, you rely on the game. And the game has to drive the fandom, and the fandom is not a 2-week, 1-month thing. It's what happens with the long tail. And the way that we'll judge the World Cup ultimately in the Americas, mostly in the United States, but in the Americas, will be what comes from it for the next generation of soccer fans or football fans. What comes from it? Does it build and crescendo and drive something that may take a period of time to hit with younger families, with younger soccer players? You look back and you go all the way back to, Brandy Chastain and Mia Hamm and
John, that's correct. But what metrics are you tracking? If you're, What signifies that it has caught on, or that we have seen an uptick?
There's not one Nielsen rating, and I think Pat would agree with this. There's not one Nielsen rating. There's not one attendance figure. It's whether there becomes a movement from this, and you can't judge that with a month after the event is over. We could get lucky and some amazing things could happen. We could get unlucky and some unplanned things could happen. But the way you judge it is, do you see a movement coming from it? Yes, we can look at ratings. Yes, we can look at public sentiment. Yes, we can all have studies, and Shripal can get the greatest AI around it in the world. But ultimately, over time, does soccer take that next step forward? Because right now in America, soccer is not a leading sport. It is a second tier sport. And how does it become a tier one sport? That's what the hope is coming out of the World Cup. And ultimately, we'll find out based on time and based on the voting of people with where they spend their time, their money, and their future.
So you see it as cultural relevance?
I think it's cultural relevance and changing of the overall perception of soccer in America and changing of the overall connection to soccer in America at the highest level. I don't think there is that connection to MLS that puts it at a level with the National Football League, certainly, but it doesn't captivate the country the way the NBA does, the way Major League Baseball does, and the way other sports at that top tier do. That will be my measuring stick over a period of time.
Good segue. Nick, Shripal, Pat, if you're running MLS, what are you doing now to make sure the World Cup is not just a 5-week spike and a return to normal, but a permanent catalyst to growth?
Look, I think the biggest piece is just taking that, like having preparation to take the momentum you have coming out of mid-July and, the fervor around actual global soccer. And you got to highlight a lot of the players in the league who participated in the World Cup. You can continue to see them play here in the U.S. Fortunately, we have players like Messi, a lot of U.S. national team players here, Mexican national team players here, where you can continue to follow some of the people that you fell in love with during the World Cup. That has to be a heavy push, as uncomfortable as it is. It's less about teams at that point. It's more about the sport. It's more about the players. Look, MLS did a great job, better or worse. Every time Messi showed up in the market, they highlighted it. There's other players in the league that are playing in the World Cup where they should be able to carry on that fandom, at least for 4 months. After that, it's all the other intangibles of, is the sport and the momentum growing? But they're going to see an inherent lift on the back half of the season just because you may have been priced out at a World Cup game. You enjoyed watching it, but I can go watch Dallas for $30. It's like, great. So you'll see a bump no matter what.
And my concern on that, and I'd like to hear Pat's point of view, my concern on that is the reach with Apple. I really get concerned with MLS, with the niche that is their broadcasting system in the US. One of the things that was great for many of us who participated with Fox or NBC or some of those large kind of linear networks is we then could move that halo forward because I knew I had Fox jamming so many Americans every day with the message. Can Apple do that? I question that, and I'm concerned about that for MLS.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Shripal. I'll tackle that last. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say that I think it's beyond just like, if you're running MLS, you have the Apple problem. Now, here's a Pat's take. You have to look at all the metrics, right? You need to capture everything, and I think the key question is like, how do you go after like the long play, right? Like fill your youth academies, drive up those registrations, the things you can control. How do you really convert more to early MLS ticket renewals and really try to make sure the kids that bought jerseys in the World Cup want to buy jerseys 18 months from now? Because those are your controllables. And then I'm definitely curious on the broadcast side, but I feel like everyone is hung up on the broadcast side. But the reality is what MLS desperately needs is every team has an academy, right? Nick started the academies in Charlotte. Have you actually filled those at capacity? How do you drive those up? Because that's going to give you a much better chance to actually build versus if you're not going to be able to affect the rating anytime soon. So like, I think the question is what's the controllable and what's the variable? Sorry, Pat.
Right. So I want to validate a lot of what I heard here. So a couple things. First of all, I was a part of growing soccer in the United States, and I've watched it go from being all
Thank
collected
you
on
for your
Fox Soccer.
service, Pat.
Yeah. Well, so it goes with David Nathanson collecting all of these European leagues on Fox Soccer Channel and building relationships with the European leagues and FIFA, um, to expanding out now where we see multiple European leagues with large contracts across established and streaming platforms, new platforms, and the World Cup being a major, the Women's World Cup and the Men's World Cup being major events inside the United States. So in those World Cup cycles, there was always anticipation, especially going back to when we nearly had every league on Fox Soccer Channel. Soccer was growing, very young, very desirable. Boy, this World Cup is going to make the viewing go up 30%. That never happened. And everybody kind of said, in every World Cup cycle we hear, this is the World Cup that will make all the viewing go up for soccer. And everybody kind of gets disappointed afterwards because that doesn't really happen. But what they've missed is that something did happen. Everybody talks about soccer. Soccer is a tier one sport in the United States. It's just the only one that's fractionalized across 6 or 7 different entities. And therefore its monetization, viewing, and accumulation of reach is so fractionalized that it makes the understanding of the impact and its position in the United States complicated. It does, and it starts with the Liga MX being the most popular soccer league in the United States, hands down. Right. And then it goes to the Premier League that has a tier one elite level contract with NBC. We go down to the rest of the domestic soccer leagues that all have and international soccer leagues that have distribution in the United States and monetize in some way. Right. The idea that a German soccer league could make, any kind of millions of dollars in the United States 20 years ago would have been, quite frankly, beyond anybody. They would have told you were crazy. Today, the Bundesliga is well distributed in the United States and makes economics. So that's number one. The impact is there, and I would argue that impact's already happened because of that, right? So when we come out of this World Cup, I wouldn't expect to see, if somebody's expecting to see lightning bolts in viewing or participation in youth soccer is already very, very high. Right? All these soccer metrics in aggregate actually are very different than they were 20 years ago. And this will just continue that process, I think. So, and I don't think soccer is ever going to be unified to a place where it's, if you're looking for it to do as well as the NBA, you're probably going to find you're not going to have a champion that does that. Right? You have to evaluate the whole thing as a group, which is different than any other tier one sport in the United States. So that's number one. Number two, when we talk about, just, talking about, how we think this thing is going to actually operate. It's the World Cup is its own thing. Okay. And it's separate from soccer leagues. And folks have to understand that it's a major event. You will draw in so much general market casual interest just because it's a spectacle that it's not comparable to say that translates into regular ticket sales. And if I were MLS, they understand that. MLS already runs a really good venue business in the United States. And I think Nick's shaking his head and he agrees. They have that. The trick is, how do you continue that slower growth, right? Everybody's looking for the lightning bolt. I think we have had a lightning bolt. It's just been a slow turn up of the electricity or the voltage over the past 20 years. How do you continue that? The viewing issue has been there for a while. Look, MLS, to their credit, they have exposure now on more fully distributed outlets. I think that's probably helping with reach and awareness. The viewing for MLS has always been kind of an interesting thing, right? Everybody goes to these games. The viewing never really the viewing has grown, but it's not, on full reach platforms, but it's never been what everybody kind of wanted it to be. So, did Apple help with that? It probably helped in some ways. It hurt in others that are pretty obvious to us. I think that's true. So how do they, in their next contract, take advantage of the economics that come from streaming while they balance that with more reach platforms, right? More of a tri-craft strategy, which I talk about a lot. So that's what I think overall about this.
All right, we are way over time, so I'm going to give everybody one quick parting shot here. What's the legacy of the 2026 World Cup when this thing wraps up, John?
I think it's a spectacle. I think it's very Americanized in that it will feel like an event in America, and we know how to do big events. I think it will also have some connectivity, what's going on in the geopolitical the geopolitical scene going on around us over the course of the next month. But I think ultimately when people look back at it, we're not going to be talking about ticket prices. We're not going to be talking about waiting in line. We're not going to be talking about the parking situation. We're going to be talking about a spectacle that just kind of transformed and evolved in America in a way that it hasn't done in other parts of the world, because we know how to do big events.
Shripal?
I think the World Cup's going to be a record. The question is it going to be a spike or a slope? And people are going to try to declare victory in 5 weeks after the event. The question is 18 months from now.
Nick?
Look, I think it'll be wildly successful. I think there'll be a lot of headlines that come out at the end on everything from ratings to revenue to attendance. I think to Shripal's point, it's just, how long does that buzz last? Can we maintain the momentum we have into Women's World Cup next year and to other big international tournaments? So that remains to be seen. But I think by July, we'll all have just kind of like blinders on that this was the greatest event that, since the Super Bowl in February. So,
Pat, take us home.
It's the era of live experiential events. There's nothing really bigger than this from a global perspective. The changes in methodology, this is going to be they're going to earn the most revenue ever. It's going to have the most sponsorship exposure ever, and it's going to be the highest viewed ever. Right? So from a spectacle, big event perspective, it's going to be a complete blowout for FIFA, Fox, and and global soccer, because the United States is the most underdeveloped soccer market in the world, but it's also the biggest market in the world. And the lift's always been there. They've gotten a lot of lift. They're going to get even more from this from a global perspective and an aggregate perspective. But to the rest of the group's points, this will take it will take a more of effective a slope versus a spike, and but it's going to be the biggest thing ever for soccer by far, and the metrics are going to show that across the board.
That is going to wrap up another episode of John Wall Street's The Sports Advisors. We will be back in 2 weeks with another roundtable on the sports businesses, the biggest topics in sports business through the operator's lens. You can always connect with a member of the John Wall Street Advisory team by reaching out to info@johnwallstreet.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe to both our newsletter and our YouTube channel. Thanks again for listening.